Finding it's quite interesting. Our strike tracker was used by a Washington Post reporter who found out about a strike of a McDonald's in a small town in Bradford, PA, 8,000 people, up right on the New York state line in Western PA. And they went on strike, and they had like 100 people in the community sign a petition in a non-union strike. No unions or worker centers
Yeah.
or any real groups involved outside of people that just been reading and seeing
Yeah.
videos of other people doing the same thing. They went on strike, and then 20 minutes up the road, like after seeing it, a bunch of Walmart hairstylists decided to go on strike too. And if you look at what's happening, particularly I think on Black TikTok right now, you're seeing these
Mhm.
kind of videos put up every day of retail workers, teenagers walking out and proudly doing it. And so,
Yeah.
I think that gets to one of the questions is, how do we? And I'm curious about your own work because I mean you've done a lot in terms of music and film to help spread these ideas. But from a cultural standpoint, we're seeing so much stuff being put out there right now. And what do you think of this moment?
I mean, we're definitely at a different place than I've ever seen before. And part of it is, maybe because of the uh, access to information about these other strikes, right? Like whereas sometimes there would be a big strike. I remember I'm old, so I remember in the 80s, there was this strike that happened in, I think it was Minnesota. It was, Kmart was, I don't even know if Kmart is a thing, but it was a Kmart strike in Minnesota or something like that. And they brought in tanks. The National Guard came in, brought in tanks. Well, anybody that heard about it, like me, that was amazing. Like to think, wow, this is really that powerful that this sort of thing would happen. But when I didn't have the article in front of me and would tell people about it, they'd think I was lying, right? Because it sounded so inspirational that I must have made it up. Now, to be honest, that was so long ago, I'm not sure on the details of what state in, but it was some big like Kmart or Walmart or something like that. But my point being is that the access to the information and to being able to share the information is part of what's helping that, I believe, and not only that, obviously there are things that led up to this, I believe, in the last 20 something years, right? You saw um, and for some of the folks involved in the strike, yeah, they're like these strikes, they're like in their 20s and 30s. So some of these things may seem like they don't matter, but they do for general culture. You had the anti-war movements happening, and people seeing that it didn't matter whether you had millions of people in the street just saying we don't want this. They're not listening to that. That's not where power is. That power isn't, the power to change your life isn't just from letting people know you're upset about it, because we saw around the world millions of people in their town squares, in their city centers, saying no, war in the Middle East, and it did not stop it even just a little bit, right? And so we had that. Then we had Occupy, where although what's promoted about Occupy often is Occupy Wall Street in New York, which took on more of a spectacle nature. But when folks here in the Bay Area did it, these were like many of the people that started doing the Occupy Oakland were like seasoned radicals. And so when things got heated up, they called for a general strike. And it wasn't a real general strike in that sense, but 50,000 people got involved and shut down the port. And that was something that went around all over. A couple months later, Occupy Nigeria said they were inspired by Occupy Oakland and did a real general strike where they shut down everything in the country and won concessions. But my point is that the only reason I'm talking about that is because this was part of a changing of culture that allowed people to see that class struggle was important, not just spectacle, not just letting our voice be heard, but the actual struggle. Now some of these strikes are justifiably just about what's happening there at that job and on that day, but it is part of a bigger thing in which people are seeing that I'm on one side of the fence, the bosses are on the other side, and it's not just that we're on a different side of the fence economically, income wise. We're on a different side of the fence functionally in this system. And how do I know that? Because if I stop working, you stop making money. And this is an important shift in consciousness than I've seen in a while, and in my lifetime at least, and in many folks' lifetime. It's funny because you were talking about the folks in Pennsylvania who weren't organized by a union. Well, one of the most militant real union, not real unions, but formal unions that I know of is the Longshoremen here in the Bay Area. And I was telling one of the old school dudes who's now retired, but one of the most like radical of them. This was like during last year, during the height of the strike wave. I was telling him about Payday Report and telling him that there were all these strikes happening all over. He was like, "What? Really?" Like he didn't know about that.
Yeah.
He had heard about BLM, but he didn't hear about the strikes attached to BLM that were happening in solidarity with it, in some cases. And everybody knew about the struggle for PPE and people but he didn't know about the strikes. So that's the way the news was promoting it was purposeful in keeping that aspect of the struggle out. But anyway, so yes.
Well, you bring up BLM, and we tracked the month after George Floyd was killed, there were 600 strikes in 1 month. 250 of them were called because the Seattle BLM came out and said, "Hey, we want to shut down businesses." And there were some small business owners that shut down in solidarity, but it was workers marching. And I was in Brazil during a general strike, and something similar had occurred. And you look at this big movement where I try to bring up with a lot of folks, what's really driving the retail worker walkouts right now is Black TikTok. I mean, all the time we're finding teenagers that are putting up these videos of walkouts, and we want to put them on the strike map, but we can't figure out the exact address. I mean, they're just happening every day.
I have mixed feelings about talking about that because I worry they're going to change the algorithm and make it so that if it's about a certain thing, it doesn't go out there. Because I noticed on Instagram, I can look that up. But then when I was looking I knew there was a thing called IA stories, and I just kept typing in IA stories. Usually, if you get close to something, it'll show you the thing. But it really was supposed to be IA_stories. It's where all the crew of the film the production companies that are making film and TV are putting their stories of bad things that happen to them. So I couldn't get it. I couldn't find it. Only if I got it exactly right did it show me that site. Now, if you put in anything, any celebrity's name, it's a letter off or something, it's going to show you what that is. What this tells me, this is the conspiracy, okay, whatever. But the point is that, they can make any sort of reasonings for making something show up less than others, So anyway, that's my only thing. I worry about social media being such a linchpin in it that can be taken away.
Well, we saw that during the Amazon union drive in Alabama. We put up something. I was tweeting out an article written by Stephen Greenhouse, who's the semi-retired labor reporter from the New York Times. about how during an anti-union meeting they made a middle-aged black woman go to the front of the room. They took a picture of her badge, and then they told her to go stand out in the hallway like she was a kid in middle school. This was reported by, the semi-retired New York Times labor reporter. Credible guy. Yeah. Verified, all that stuff. Amazon Web Services runs Twitter's content moderation. So Amazon, it was starting to go viral. In a couple minutes, it had like a couple hundred retweets. Amazon suspends it for fact-checking, and then they dropped it in the middle of the night at 4 a.m. when everybody's sleeping. This isn't a conspiracy theorist. This is a veteran New York Times labor reporter. And, there were other people. A More Perfect Union, they had a video with 500,000 views about Amazon. It also got pulled off. So we saw that in Alabama, that they saw so many people were interested in that union drive, and it spoke to so much. And it was flawed in some ways, but it still really lit a spark under a lot of people, that they were able to do that. And I think, I think we in the left, I started my career in an independent media center in the lead up to the war in Iraq. We don't have an independent media center movement anymore. We don't really talk about building our own culture, our own films.
Because they made us think that social media was independent. Most people think that, It's funny, everybody has I talk to my kids and their friends about, like the idea that what they're seeing, and this is not even to do with, radical ideas, but like kids think that what they're seeing is just a result of what's hot right now, what everyone is talking about. I'm seeing this dance happen, I'm seeing that, but it is very controlled and manipulated, even on that, like what music is coming out right now, all those sorts of things. But the difference is, a while ago, you would know what's mainstream, quote unquote, and what's underground, and you could, maybe go find something else. But right now, people think there's no difference because it's just what you're seeing on social media is a democratic result of what people are talking about and what people want. And that's a little bit more dangerous in the sense that, you don't see the hand as much, it's
well, something I think about a lot that disturbs me is, I was at Politico as their labor reporter in the lead up to the Trump election. I left. I was actually legally fired during the union drive halfway through it. But I'll never forget getting this memo about how the traffic had gone through the roof because of Trump. And the editor-in-chief, Susan Glasser, who's now at the New York Times, wrote in the email, "The Trump bump is real." These algorithms are all so manipulated. Yeah. I mean, that email, I remember sitting there reading that and just sitting there and thinking, like, why are we even covering this guy?
Yeah.
And she was just saying, we're pulling in money hand over fist because the Trump bump is real. There's the traffic. Yeah. And it was just like one of the most cold-hearted things I've ever heard in the news business.
It's crazy. Yeah. Yeah. And so but maybe we should, what we should focus on is the fact that right now it's happening and people are using social media to be able to get these ideas about organizing on the job out there and make them popular. So it's happening right now. And how do we prepare ourselves for the time when, when they get more organized and figure out how to make it not be so popular on social media?
What do you think we need to do?
Well, I mean, the answer is organized, but the question is how, what thing will allow folks to get to these places that, are organizing on their own and get folks to be able to network and coordinate with each other. Maybe it's not necessarily traveling to a town or whatever. Maybe there are some coordinated actions between different groups of folks, like, the McDonald's in Pennsylvania and the McDonald's in New Jersey or whatever.
We saw that during the teacher strikes a lot, where teachers disobeyed the union leadership, and, teachers in West Virginia were talking to teachers in Oklahoma and in Arizona and doing it, through social media. I mean, finding each other through these Facebook groups.
in some of these cases, such as, like the chain places, they're supposed to be, owned independently, and so that's where the negotiating, become hits at a standstill, because the, supposedly independent owner can't get more from corporate or whatever. But I think that's going to be the next step, is that these places, when they're asking for more, they're going to coordinate and go against the corporate side, right? And be able to coordinate, whereas I think maybe the difference is, like, right now, it's a whole, teachers in California is a whole different school district and state government than teachers in Nevada or something like that, right? But it's not a different, McDonald's or Burger King in California is not a different corporation than McDonald's or Burger King in Nevada. So some of those things can work and have a big, huge dent. And, so I don't know. One of the things that we should do is what you're doing, is putting out, letting folks know that it's happening, so that people see it as a tool when they're ready to try to change something.
It's been quite liberating. We bring in about a little less than $100,000 a year off of our readers, and we have about a 2.5-person staff. Other people have other gigs as well. And we pay people a living wage. I try to pay everybody $32 an hour. But, it's interesting, because I came up through, The Nation and In These Times and Politico and The Guardian, and looking at all my friends in all these outlets that are dying, and they're looking at their future as bleak. And I'm saying, well, we're picking up subscribers every month, and, eventually this is going to be pretty good. I'm in my mid-30s, so it's easy to do. But I think that sort of power, I really think about it a lot, that we need to get back to the independent media center movement. That we need to, as the left, really have real conversations, just not about posting videos on Facebook, but about covering things, I mean, there's so many times where if you just go out somewhere and you're just there, you can get incredible stories, and people are inspired by other people. People see themselves reflected. And that's one of the big problems, the distrust of the media, is that people never see themselves written about or talked about,
Yeah. And I think that a big difference between what you're doing and what just the general independent media idea is, and it's something that I tried to touch on, and sorry to bother you, is there's a difference between just showing people that things are bad and how they're bad, which is what media does across the board. Even what's thought of as progressive media will be like, here's how things are fucked up, and they'll do it at various levels of greatness with that. But the difference is that this is showing, here's a way to fight back against it, right? And so we don't just need independent media, and we don't just need independent progressive or radical media. We need independent radical media that is going to show people how to fight back, how other people are fighting back, how people are organizing. Because I think that's, what you were talking about is some of the pessimism that's out there versus some of the optimism that you have. And I think some of that optimism that you have may come from seeing the pathway forward, right? And so often, people get burnt out from hearing news because it's just, it just adds to the argument that there's no way to win, right?
The cynicism.
And this, yeah. And so I want to be clear. One of my reasons for wanting to see something like this is I think that we need a mass militant radical labor movement that can withhold labor as a tactic and strategy for winning goals in social movements, and one that will, and because of that, be able to grow into an actual revolutionary movement, because the kind of world we need is one that's only going to come about through class struggle, and one in which uh, the working class has democratic control over the wealth that we create with our labor. But to get to that place, we got to have a movement in which people are seeing themselves as the people that create the wealth, as the people that have the power actually in this world. And part of getting to that place is a movement. It is people seeing that other people like themselves are doing something, and it's not extracurricular. That's also what I think a lot of independent media throughout the 80s and 90s and 2000s put forward, is like, to be involved in radical politics is an extracurricular activity. You go to the rally on Saturday. Maybe you go on Wednesday at 6 o'clock, right? You do this. You know, do you have time to be involved in this? And it's primarily because radicals stopped organizing on the job for a long time. And so we stopped trying to make actual class struggle, like at the pivot point of capitalism. We focused more on things that we felt that we could do outside of the job, and that's a big fallout from McCarthyism of the 50s.
Yeah, you bring up McCarthyism of the 50s, and you bring up the Longshoremen. I don't know if you're familiar with the history of the UE and the United Electrical Workers.
No, tell me.
Well, when they were all endorsing Wallace in '48, for president when Wallace was running against Truman as a left challenge, mm-hmm. the AFL and the CIO were trying to arrange a merger. Walter Reuther, the head of the UAW, Phil Murray, the head of the Steelworkers. And as part of that merger, they decided to purge out 13 unions. And then they decided, instead of going down south and really investing money in Operation Dixie, since these people aren't purging their commies, we're going to attack them. We're going to raid their membership, which is a lot what happened. And only two of those unions survived, which was the Longshoremen and the United Electrical Workers, who occupied the factory in Chicago a few years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
And I come out of 3 generations of that, and we come out of a very mixed-race neighborhood. And so when I was growing up as a kid, growing up in a neighborhood of that union, it was a part of my living, breathing life. And as I got older, and I went to a majority black high school, and then I went to a liberal arts college on a full scholarship, and I was like, wow, these white people don't even know they're white. It was just one of those kind of, like, as a white guy, I was like, wow, you people are really white. Like, you don't even know it. Wow, we're really listening to Dave Matthews Band at a party. Like, what is this? No, I mean, he does some good stuff, and they did a good collab with J5. But my point being is, as I got more and more into this sort of elite world, going to elite liberal arts college from a working class background and then going into journalism, I saw these subjects becoming such intellectual matters. Like, you got to read the right book, and you have to read Marx, and if you read that book, and if you read that book, and I said, I learned trade unionism from the people I grew up with. They lived it every day, and I think that's one of the big disconnects of the media, which is that we don't train enough people from working class backgrounds of a variety of different races. I mean, it's overwhelmingly white, the media, and we don't reflect those stories. We reduce it to these almost like 20,000-foot views of the workers aren't quite making enough money, and it's like, well, the story is always more complicated than that. There's always a lot more happening. I mean, what do you think of that, of how some of because you've talked about this a bunch, of how, the new left and the left sort of became disconnected from the working class, and for some reasons due to the reactionary nature of some elements of the working class as well.
Well, I mean, the whole reason for needing to organize the working class presupposes the idea that some elements of the working class are reactionary, right? So that can't be the reason for not organizing the working class. I mean, I know that that's what was put forward, but that doesn't, but yeah, there was, there was it wasn't only due to that reactionary nature. It was you know, so like as we talked about, there was McCarthyism of the 50s, but that was actually, um, one of my lines is that that was actually enabled by some incorrect decisions of the Communist Party earlier than that, where the United Front Against Fascism uh, called for not organizing openly in certain ways in order to in order to basically say, look, we're not going while the U.S. goes and fights Hitler, we're not going to organize a revolution while the army's gone, right? And so there was a change in tack, whereas we're in the 20s and 30s, people were organizing openly as communists and radicals of various natures, and and they were gaining a lot of ground, right? And not to say there weren't, but one of the reasons that they went underground was what we were talking about. And by them going underground, yeah, when House Un-American Activity Committee started pointing fingers, they were able to say that person's being dishonest. They're actually a communist. Whereas 15 years before, had they tried to pull that, people would be like, yeah, we know. They helped us move our shit back in the house when we were getting evicted, right? But in the 50s, when they said it, people they had been not be, they were like, we're progressives, we're not, communists, that sort of a thing, right? And so that combined with splits in the Communist Party around around critique or non-critique of Stalin, and whatever mistakes and or atrocities happened during that time, and split up the Communist Party, and which was the biggest radical organization in the United States, and many of those folks that split off from that became part of what became called the New Left, of which I later on, 20 something years later, joined one of those groups, which was the Progressive Labor Party. But those groups took on a new tact, which was saying like, okay, we're moving to the cities mainly, we're organizing students, and and moved out of many of those areas, even though yes, they were kicked out of some of those organizing areas. But that's like saying I lost the fight because the other guy hit me. You know what I'm saying? Like,
everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face. Mike Tyson, right?
And so you're supposed to keep fighting, but they're, because of all these things, they focused on students and they left behind organizing in those places where 20 something years before, and 20 years before sounds like a lot when you say it, but for us, 20 years before is like the year 2000, right? Like, so there's, you're of a certain age, there's not that much time in between, but 20 years before, they had been organizing in, in Montana and Utah, and were places that were considered hotbeds of communist activity, right? So anyway, they took on this new tact in the 60s. And if you're organizing students, you can do a student strike, but it's not the same effectiveness, does not have the same relationship to the power that's there. And things become more about spectacle, right? They become more about, whereas the demonstrations in the 20s and 30s, if you had 10,000, 20,000 people, it was like, here's 10 or 20,000 people that are in your industry that are going to shut you down if you don't do it. So it was a demonstration of power. It wasn't, what is the rest of that statement when you say something's a demonstration? What is it demonstrating, right? And at the time in the 20s and 30s, it was a demonstration of the power to shut you down, right? But by the 60s, because things had shifted to being about students, it was primarily spectacle that was happening, right? And so some of this were decisions by left themselves, not just liberal left, but radical left that made these decisions on how they were going to organize. And and so the new left, you know, though, you know, did take on other different tacks. They were very open with, you know, we are radicals, we are revolutionaries, we are communists, we are socialists, you know, and um, took that and were very open with it. But they tried to make connections to other movements that were happening around the world that were in different places, right? So like you try to make a connection to, you know, the Cultural Revolution in China. Well, they had a different thing. You try to make a connection to other places at different revolutionary points. Well, they didn't skip their point where they organized the working class, right? Those places didn't do that, right? Even when you talk about places like Cuba, like a lot of times what was taught to me at first was like Cuba, you know, a few people came through, they had guerrilla warfare and they did this. But in reality, no, they had general strikes that shut the shit down. That's, you know, like them organizing to the point where there could be general strikes is the only reason why Fidel and them were able to take power, right? So the point is that so the new left got infatuated with these places that had actually done what the new left wasn't doing, which was figure out how to connect to and organize the ruling class. In the 60s was the first time you started hearing the students are the revolution. Well, I don't know if it was the very first time, but when they said it, it wasn't correct. Like it hadn't been historically correct in any other revolution that the students were the revolution, right? But they started saying that. Now, yes, young people are involved in revolutions, but they're, you know, it's not necessarily the students. It's not only the young people, right? And so that's the thing. So that culture came about, and because of that, because it had to be primarily focused on spectacle, then you had to have people, you know, like you're a student, you just got your degree, you're going to get another degree, you're going to, you know, you are a radical, but you're going to make it seem okay what you're doing, and you're going to, you know, and then you have many people, you know, get jobs at the university and then have to keep publishing. And see, here's the thing, is that if you're just teaching and publishing, you're going to eventually, the whole thing is you got to say something new the next time, right? Be fine to say something new if what you were doing every day was organizing and noticing new phenomenon, like, hey, I was wrong about this thing because we're working and this isn't working, blah, blah, blah. But you have people writing what are becoming the pillars of a certain group of radicals, but those people writing that aren't actually engaged in the scientific process to come up with those new theories. They're just writing and discrediting other things based on wanting to write something new, based on what they sat there at their desk and decide it should be the thing. And so we have, and so then there becomes a very particular focus on language. Hey, I'm gonna change the language around this thing, right? I'm gonna change the language, like basically creating theory that makes it okay to just create theory. And so many of us, including myself, were very affected by that. And to where we start thinking that, and it's not that language isn't important. Language is important. Culture is important. What we do, what we say is an extension of things that we are doing in our life, right? But there's a focus on it to the point where it becomes primary as opposed to what someone is doing, and how we can organize. And so, and because there becomes this focus on language, there also becomes a different way that we talk to each other, right? If you believe that it's going to take the whole working class to shut this place down and and create a revolution that's going to create a whole different system, then you realize you need other people. If you think it's all about putting forward the right way to speak about things, you can say fuck you to every single person you disagree with. But I learned in some of the work that I did that I couldn't just do that, because I might feel right. Even if they feel bad and feel like, oh, he's right, they're not going to, be able to, I'm not going to be able to organize with them. I'm not going to get them to do the things that I want them to do.
Yeah, and I think, circling back to the issue of social media, I think we get into this issue on social media of gatekeeping, right? Where who makes these articles, even in the left press, go viral? And sometimes you read these theoretical articles. I've seen several articles when covering strikes where somebody goes out to a picket line. The lead of the article, because they're from, a big East Coast city or big West Coast city, is, oh my God, I've never been out to the Rust Belt before, and here's what it was like going through the airport. And it's like, how about you just dateline it right on the picket line? Just describe what the picket line looks like. People live in the Rust Belt. I live here in Pittsburgh. A lot of us, it's not that romantic always, and we see this all the time, that it becomes about who are the pontificators versus who are the voices that they're uplifting and amplifying. We don't have necessarily the Studs Terkels that we used to have in our movement. Studs was always one of my heroes because of that sort of format of just letting workers speak for themselves and giving them a platform to do that.
Yeah. I mean, definitely the culture during, and probably before this, but during social media is, what stank do you have to put on it? Like, how beautifully can you say this? That sort of a thing. So, I mean, and to a certain extent, there's some of that you got to live with in this, because the people watching that's what they're used to seeing, right? So they're used to seeing, I don't know. If it was back in the day, like Geraldo Rivera, he does a certain thing. Like if he came to cover a strike, he's going to do that same thing. But your point is you get people to watch it in that way. And so to a certain extent, I'm not worried about that much. I worry about it when it stops being covered.
Yeah.
Right? So because one thing that I saw, like, and I've seen a few versions of this, but like with Occupy Oakland, it got to a point where people didn't like the way that we were being covered during that. And so when the police, that's a Freudian slip, when the media came around, a few times people would start throwing shit at them, like, get out of here, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you want people to find out about this, right? Like, so we want everybody to, to do it, and we're not going to change like how Oprah decides to cover a strike. But, if she covers it, then we got millions of people seeing it, and that's better than it not being covered. That's my take on that.
Well, we had a situation here last year during a BLM protest where a local CBS cameraman, who's actually a union guy and a good guy, got beat up because he was filming people rioting.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had been there with a camera, I probably would have done the same thing. I would have tried not to get people's faces in the image, but I would have, that's still something that occurs.
Yeah.
And, they beat this guy up, and I saw people on the left here beating up a journalist, and I was just appalled by it. And I've seen this in other situations, even like, covering unions or other things where people are very much like, okay, I mean, I deal this with unions all the time. There'll be a strike and they'll sit around and wait 3 days and figure out how they're going to talk to the media. And it's like, okay, you guys just went out on the picket line now. I think we need to sort of drop some of that sort of distrust. I mean, not Not that we don't have reason not to be distrustful of the
No,
corporate
I think
media.
you should be distrustful, but the point is that, like if you're having a rebellion, it doesn't help if only the 20 people that live around there know about it, right? If that's your point, is to have that. Even if you're having a strike, let's say you're having a strike and you shut down your place of business, you want people to know about it. Why? Because you want it to be duplicated. You want it to be replicated. I mean, the smart thing that the media did in the 80s and 90s was to not cover shit, right? Like they saw that even though in the 50s and 60s they covered different rebellions, different movements, and put it in a bad light, that what it did was inspire the folks that were watching it to go and try to get involved, right? So what you saw them do in the 80s, 90s, and beginning of the 2000s was just not talk about it at all. People thought that nothing at all was ever happening because they just effectively squashed it. So whether you trust the media or not, you want others to know about it. And that's the point, is like, if I'm involved in something, and I'm not just talking about me now with the platform that I have, but ever, it's because I want it to get bigger. It's not like I'm, thinking like this is about this moment and nothing else. It's about, you want the movement to get bigger. You want people to organize and get power over their lives. And you want it to go on from there even. And so I don't think you should base everything on, hey, the whole basis for this movement or this action is just to get in the media, because then you're unlikely to be actually doing something that will move the needle. Because the thing that will move the needle is if you're able to challenge capital.
Yeah.
And that's going to be through organizing people to withhold their labor. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't want to keep you too long because I know we've been talking for about 45 minutes. I mean, we could talk for hours. But
Yeah.
it seems, even circling back, if you look at our strike tracker, about 75% of the links we have up there are actually from local TV stations.
Yeah.
And I've noticed this because, reporters, more mainstream, less political reporters or somewhat apolitical reporters call me up often to ask for advice. And I'm seeing a lot more of them cover it, particularly at local TV stations, because it is a human interest story, but also because at the beginning of the pandemic, we really made these workers, these essential workers, out to look like heroes.
Yeah.
And once you value someone, I mean, I've seen that quote in almost every strike I covered. We got these guys back during the pandemics. We risked our lives, and now they're, treating us like this. Do you think something has shifted during the pandemic?
Oh yeah. It definitely came to a head with exactly what you're saying. People, first, you had that time when a lot more things were shut down and people were just there with their family. Like, okay, this is what life is about, right? This is like, life is not necessarily about being at work, right? So that people knew that. And so you started to think about, this is my opinion, that people went back and started not only to think about the risk of that they were taking while they were there, but what it was, a risk as opposed to life that they should be living, right? And so and it made the necessity of that labor a lot more amplified, like, because they started talking about essential workers. That was a mistake maybe on the part of the ruling classes, to let the media talk about that, like, in the sense that, like, you need these folks to to make, to keep the gears running, to keep the gears of society. And so people started having, you know, more of a sense of their own worth, right? And it's funny because a few times people hear that we're going to do work stoppages at, at supermarkets, called me up and said, "Hey, we're thinking about doing this. What do you think?" And I'm like, "It's happening, blah, blah, blah." And they're like, "Could you tell us where?" And I was like, Payday Report or whatever other articles there were. And people were like, "Wow, it's really happening." They're doing, and they did it, right? That, like, it happened that quick. Whereas before, people would be like, "That would be good, but that'll never happen," that sort of a thing. That's the thing. That's the way that they taught us. Think about this. Our culture is watching TV and movies. Like, you go to work and then you come home and you're either on social media or you're watching TV and movies. How many, out of the millions of hours of film that has been created from the 1960s to now, how many times has organizing even a work stoppage been a possibility in one of those storylines? And it seems like, it seems like something extraneous that I'm talking about, but it's really a big fabric of our life because, I always say, like, I've never been to Baghdad, but in my head, when I say that name, I have a picture of it. It's probably from some James Bond movie or something else. Well, now, we've seen it in the news, but let's say, some other place. You see it in movies. And so our idea of what the world is comes from movies and television. And, it just hasn't even been part of our reality that until now. And we see how excited people are to see that it's a possibility, that to see anything in it, that's a possibility. And so, yes, right now is a time when the working class is ready to do something. Everybody doesn't know what they're ready to do, but they're looking for ways to change their lives. They're looking for ways to be a part of, changing the world. People are taking advantage of any of those times that they can see doing that. And they have less respect for, like people always talk about, like, on articles about music and Trump. They talk about, they're like, "Oh, the coup which is my band, like, they were the only ones, saying something against Trump in the early 90s. I don't know if that's the truth, but the point is that so much media went towards idolizing the bosses, right? Idolizing the bosses. And, not just hip hop, but, the biggest, like, reality show there was in the 80s, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, all these sorts of things that went on. But right now, people aren't having that shit. This tells you of a big change in culture. The thing is that it's not going to keep changing towards that direction on its own. There is going to be a pushback. You already see it in media. You already see shows where they're having the protesters be stupid and, asking for too much and blah, 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 and just making it part of different things. You see with BLM, like, you'll see a bunch of movies. If you go to the movies right now, you'll see trailers for a bunch of movies where the hero is a black cop, a female black cop, right?
Who gets in the middle, who can see both sides.
You see on right now, there's this meme of this Mexican cop punching people and doing karate kicks, and people are sharing it. right? Like, whoa, I mean, because she's doing some amazing martial arts, but to oppress people with, right? You know, like there's going to be a pushback. It's not just going to be on the job, but they're going to try to get people in their minds. And our only answer to it is going to be to organize, like, you know, there aren't radical parties anymore that have any reach, but somebody has to be coordinating these things, reaching out to folks that are organizing in these different places and coordinate some of those things and help it grow, because it's going to get smashed if we don't.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this gets back to some of the points about independent media, but circling back to the point about films, you know, your film "Sorry to Bother You," which just came out what, three years ago?
Yep.
3 years ago, and you
Yep.
probably started making it a few years prior to that, the process of it.
Oh yeah, no, I started writing it 7 years before that. I wrote it 7 years before that, and it took me 6 or 7 years to get it made.
What do you think the environment, if you pitched a film like that today, would be? Would it be different?
Well, I'll tell you what. There's a lot of films that are pitching and getting made today who had in their pitch deck, which is a little packet you give to say it'll be like this and it'll be like that. They have "Sorry to Bother You" in their pitch deck. So the idea is there. I'll put it like this: everybody believes they're not part of the system, right? We all believe that. We're all, you know, part of keeping capitalism going, and we all feel that we are the exception. And that includes executives as well, right? That includes people who are like, hey, I didn't think anything else was possible to happen in the world, so I might as well get in where I fit in. But in their mind, many of them like would agree with the politics, but they're, of course, just gonna, you know, they're like the manager who could have, you know, who was good at what they were doing, and they could have became a union organizer, but they got picked off by the management, and became one of them, right? So in their mind, they would like to do those sorts of things. So right now is a time, if there were radical films that could get made, because, you know, I mean, there aren't like 5 people sitting in a room and figuring out how to effectively run capitalism. It's the reason that we call it a system is that it doesn't matter what you think. You know, if the machinations are going, it's going to keep going, right? It's not about what you think, it's about what you do. And so if there's no organized thing to it. So what I'm saying is that right now that pitch could go well. But in a couple years, if there's, you know, pushback against it, they'll find every reason. Because before that, when, you know, before "Sorry to Bother You," the answer wouldn't be like, oh, these politics are too radical. Their answer would be, there would be somebody who after you leave the room, who says, people don't want to see this. People don't pay for this kind of thing. They don't pay for that. And so that would be the thing. They'd be like, I really want to do it. You know, I had a record label exec one time tell me, you know, it's similar to this. It wasn't about politics, but he was saying, look, I love classical music, but I'm not going to sign, you know, a classical musician to play piano. It's not going to sell, right? So there would be people in the entertainment industry that might have a radical politic, a radical idea in their head, like that would be a better world, but they're told like, okay, this isn't going to sell. And so I wrote a thing where the main problem people had with it was that there were horse dicks in it. And so that was the main problem. And I don't think people thought about it till afterward that, oh, this is what the politics of this thing is, right? So,
And
I,
now
you
we're
know,
using horse drugs. So
yeah,
people are taking horse drugs as a sham to fight off COVID.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
I know you got to run. Is there any projects you're working on that you can give as a preview thing, or projects in general, or areas in which you're working that you're excited about, or that you think other people should be looking at?
I have a TV show that will start prep for a TV show that all the scripts are done, and we'll start prep for that October 18th. And I mean, all I'll say about that is it's it's about a 13-foot tall black man who lives in Oakland. Um, and then I have uh, two other features written. So um, yeah, and so no matter what no matter what the story is about, my ideas are always going to be uh, the thing that I'm doing, right? I'm making stuff with my ideas, so it's always going to have similar politic, because that's what all my art has ever had. And it is, like, all you can do if you're making art is make art with your viewpoint, right? You're not going to make your art with somebody else's viewpoint. And I'm very aware of um, my own viewpoint. I'm very aware of uh, how to get that point across. So yeah, got a bunch of stuff. We're going to be making. The coup we're doing a song per episode, so we'll have an album in which that'll be the soundtrack to the show. So yeah, been busy doing a lot of that, and so this is like a time that I have to put this out. And so what I'm making is what I'm calling a cinematic album, in which "Sorry to Bother You" was the first single, and there'll be 8 cinematic songs, if you will, and I have deals for a lot of them already. So,
Congratulations.
but it's basically a lot. I've lived my whole life by biting off more than I can chew productivity wise. So I'm pretty much, working to get this stuff done. And, in a few years, the cinematic album will be complete.
Well, that's very exciting, and we certainly look forward to hearing more about it. Before we go, because it's getting late, certainly on your end.
Yeah.
Back to the issue of optimism. I think the left loses so much optimism. But when you work in creative professions in the media and entertainment industry like us, where you're always pitching, you're always coming up with new ideas, you almost have to be. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, it was very scary, but as a labor reporter, it was also very exciting for me because I was seeing all these strikes, and I was saying, "Wow, this is going to be like the Civil War or World War II. This is going to shake things up in this society."
Yeah.
That's the famous Gramsci saying, pessimism of the mind, optimism of the will, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And what would you say that you would tell people in this period about maintaining optimism?
Look, we're at the beginning of what could be, what is already one of the biggest strike waves in U.S. history, right? I mean, how many has there been since March of last year?
1,580.
1,580. And that has to be the most since the 40s, right? In that period of time. And so, we always keep looking to some other time in history as the time that they almost could have done this, or if I had been in that time. But what is being told to us right now is this is the time where it's possible to make things happen. It's possible for the working class to get radicalized, to get organized. It's happening right before our eyes. And the only way that we don't feel that way is that we don't see everything that's happening, right? We get bombarded with the other things. So right now is the time, and if you're listening to this, it's because you have some interest in the working class getting organized. This is your time. You're the one that's here. 20 years from now, somebody's going to wish that they were here in this time doing the things that we're not doing. And we got to take advantage of this moment. And we got to do it. And what does that mean? We got to go into places and salt. We got to go into places and salt and provide.
And by salt, you mean send in organizers into places to get jobs.
Send in organizers into places, and we can't leave it to just the established unions, because the established unions right now, the leadership is not in the radical place that they need to be, right? In order to organize, some of the ways that we need to organize in this, with some of these jobs, are ones that are breaking the law, right? We're going to have to break the law, because if we wait for things to be legal in the right ways, we're going to be not doing it. But the people are ready, and so we got to organize a new labor movement that will break the Taft-Hartley laws and organize solidarity strikes and we already have radicals willing to go to jail for breaking a window or doing this or that. They'll be much more loved if they go to jail for organizing a solidarity strike. But even if that were to happen, that's not going to happen. That would give us, give the movement so much more drive. But this is the time. What are we haven't seen from everything from BLM to these strike waves. Things are happening now, and it's a great moment to be alive, right? And you could look at things as a list of problems, or you could look at things as these steps that are happening. And yeah, some of these strikes are people just like reaching out, like, what do I do? And doing it without connecting to any organizations and things like that. We can't let them die out, because that will die out. People will get burnt out. They'll do the strike on their own. They'll get attacked. They'll get fired, because they won't get fired if they have a larger organization helping them. And we got to reach out to those folks and help them out.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add?
I'm sure there's something else I want to add. I don't know, but it's good. I could keep going.
Well, it's been so nice chatting, and we're just off the record here, but I really appreciate the opportunity. I admire your work a lot. I have this tendency, I think you'd get a kick out of this. It's a weird autistic tendency. When I'm writing, I tend to listen to certain songs on a loop as sort of pump-up songs.
Okay.
And I always listen to Oh Yeah, at the beginning of this.
Oh, yeah.
As that kind of like, all right, you got to write the grant proposal, like,
yeah.
I probably listened to that song like 600 times on a loop over the years.
That's
I really
also
appreciate meeting up.
Creatively, that's something like we've come out with a few albums that people have been like, oh, they're not political anymore. And that's when they first hear it, because a lot of our stuff, I'm trying to get people pumped. For a little bit, there was this idea that you had to sound angry. You had to sound, like everything was, and some of my friends make music like that. And that definitely came from the punk tradition, right? Is like you had to, but from the organizing I've done, I realized that you have to be hopeful about something to want to get involved in something. So a lot of our music has, I've always tried to make something hopeful. because I know that that's more effective. Like, it's not that I don't have things to get angry about in there, but the question is, is it hopeful?
Have you ever seen that Gail Garcia Bernal movie? No,
I haven't seen it yet.
you
No,
familiar
no.
with it?
Yeah, yeah, I know about it. Yeah.
It's you should watch it. I saw it 3 times in theater when it came out. First off, they did in like this 1980s magnetic cassette tape, the type that newscasters
Yeah.
use, so they could blend the footage in.
Yeah.
And it's all about the ad men. There's a kid. His parents were leftist guerrillas that were disappeared, but he's a commercial ad man, and he comes into the lefties and he says, "Hey, look, guys, you got to make this about rainbows and dance parties. We can't go on about the massacres forever. We can note that, but you got to make
Yeah.
it about rainbows and dance parties and beers and
Well, because what do we want in life? It's about what are we fighting for, right?
yeah,
So, like, yeah, like, we're not fighting for more, like, anger. we're fighting for a place where we can relax and get high, right? Or like where we have control of our lives, and and we have less hours of being productive, maybe. And but it's more organized, so it gets more, we get more made in general, but we're fighting for a better life. And what does a better life mean? It doesn't just mean more square footage on your house. It means, and it doesn't just mean more money. It means what, that it means time.
yeah,
Really, it's all about time, right?
yeah. Do you mind if I use this last section where we talked about your music and the films?
Yeah.
In it? Okay, good.
Yeah, go
But
ahead.
but we'll wrap here because it's getting late. I know our
All
sound
right.
production guys.
Yeah.
It's almost 9:30 here. We're
Okay.
actually probably the interesting thing about Pittsburgh is they have all these old nonprofit club owned bars.
Oh, really?
They've been around for
I
like
didn't know
80 years.
about
They're
that.
old immigrant bars. So like the Slovak Association has theirs, and the Siberian, and the Italian, and so there's this place, the Elks Club. They have a
That's
legend.
like Italy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's an Elks Club near here, which is ironic because my last name is Elk, and it's like $50 a year to join. Then you go there, and it's like $2 a beer,
Huh.
and it's right next to downtown. So it's just interesting. We were going to swing by there, but I'd love to talk and collaborate some more. And it
Yeah.
really it moved me to know that you read our stuff, because sometimes we don't. Sometimes we get a lot of traffic, but for the most part, we speak to a couple thousand readers.
Yeah. No, I think it'll grow as people figure out the need for it to grow. Now, it's interesting because I was talking to somebody that was and this is related to how sometimes when people first start getting involved in labor organizing, they don't realize the need to spread the word in the same way. Because I was talking to a IATSE person about, they have a strike authorization vote that's about to happen, and there, and a few actors, a few well-known actors have come out and said, I support this strike and blah blah blah, which I think is good in general for like people to say. But this person was skeptical, like, oh, they're just being opportunists. They can say that because they can do it because they're famous, so they blah blah blah. And I was like, look, you got to take this where you can get it. You need people seeing these famous actors saying, there's a strike and I'm going to support it. Why? Not only for this strike, but for the culture of, the labor movement in general. And as people start organizing, they start once they go through a strike, they start realizing the importance of other people knowing about strikes and the importance of letting their people that they're organizing know about other strikes. And so I think this is important right now. I think the readership is going to grow because it's going to be necessary for folks to find out about it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time, and let me know if I can ever help in any way. I mean, it's sort of we're trying to.
You are helping, so.
Yeah, we're trying to find some more funding so we can improve the strike tracker. But it's been interesting because a lot of reporters are calling me up and they're using it as a tool. I mean, we have links to 1,500, and that's just what we found links to on social media. So that tells me that there's a lot that people never posted about because they were scared.
Yeah.
Or or they never could find a reporter to write it up, or we just didn't find.
Trying to raise how much are you trying to raise? What's the stated goal?
Well, we got to raise about 5,000, replace what we lost. So.
Oh, replace what you lost on what?
We just had a grant expire recently, so I've just been eating rice.
Hit me up about it. I'll see if I can pass around the hat.
Okay.
And
I'll send our fundraiser over. And we'll probably use this in one of our clips. But thanks so much, and let's stay in touch.
All right. Okay. Peace.
Peace.